Entering the world as the offspring of King James I and VI, the lovely Elizabeth Stuart was the delight and pride of her aristocratic family. So how did everything unravel so terribly? Elizabeth might have commenced life as her nation's prized crown jewel, but her existence concluded in acrimony and harshness. The cause behind this dramatic transformation was profoundly unsettling. Stay tuned for more on that topic. Now let us delve deeply into the sorrowful life of history's Winter Queen. Although princesses are often indulged in various ways, Elizabeth Stuart truly surpassed expectations. Born in August 1596 to Queen Anne of Denmark, her father, King James VI of Scotland, already possessed a male heir in Elizabeth's elder brother, Henry. This alleviated the pressure on the royal lineage, allowing James the liberty to pamper Elizabeth excessively. The consequences were less than favorable. As a youthful royal, Elizabeth displayed more than a touch of fussiness. He grew up venerating his brother Henry, whose esteemed position as Prince of Wales rendered him particularly appealing to Elizabeth. But there was more to it. When his infant sister Margaret arrived, Elizabeth purportedly gave the girl no notice whatsoever, choosing instead to bestow all his affection upon, you guessed it, Henry. One cannot entirely fault Elizabeth for becoming self-absorbed. After all, his upbringing was somewhat questionable. Although his father, King James, provided him with the finest tutors, he declined to instruct him in any of the classics. Why? James believed Latin had the regrettable tendency to make women more shrewd. Well, he certainly didn't want that. Then again, Elizabeth likely could have benefited from greater shrewdness. In 1603, Elizabeth's existence transformed abruptly. That year, Queen Elizabeth I of England finally died, transferring her throne to none other than Elizabeth's father, who now appended King James I of England to his designations. This distinguished house of Stuart stood at the pinnacle of the Western world. Yet the greater their stature, the more precipitous their decline. Oh no, make no mistake, initially it was all the indulged Elizabeth Stuart could have possibly desired. When the Stuarts journeyed south to England for James's coronation, Elizabeth accompanied his mother in a grand procession filled with continuous amusement and reveled in the lavish English court for several weeks. It's just that the celebration was short-lived. Elizabeth's new position as Princess of England rested on unstable foundations from the outset. The deceased Queen Elizabeth of France had bequeathed England embroiled in a fierce struggle between Catholics and Protestants, and numerous factions viewed the Protestant House of Stuart as a menace to their religious liberty. Ultimately, this tension reached a notorious peak, with Elizabeth situated squarely in the center. In 1605, the infamous Gunpowder Plot struck England when conspirators attempted, unsuccessfully, to overthrow Elizabeth's father, King James, by detonating Parliament. However, most are unaware of Elizabeth's part in the scheme. After eliminating James, the collaborators planned to install the 9-year-old Elizabeth on the throne, replacing his dear father. Oh, but the story continues. If it appears complimentary that the conspirators selected Elizabeth Stuart, well, it was not. It was utterly demeaning. The plotters genuinely desired him only as a figurehead queen, and although they had evaluated all his siblings in sequence, they believed they could manage him most effectively and even persuade him to adopt Catholicism. Well, he would demonstrate their error. With the Gunpowder Plot concluded, the royal family focused their attention on arranging Elizabeth's marriage as swiftly as possible. To Elizabeth's pleasure, he was a highly sought-after asset on the marriage market, with numerous princes and other rulers competing for his hand. Yet despite this abundance of potential partners, it was far from a fairy tale scenario. King James was exceptionally particular when it concerned arranging Elizabeth's marriage. He viewed the decision as supremely significant and aimed to find a man not only of sufficient noble birth for his daughter, but also a steadfast Protestant to perpetuate the House of Stuart's religious beliefs. One day, the circumstances became quite complex. Among Elizabeth's prospective husbands was Gustavus Adolphus, the future King of Sweden. He possessed an excellent lineage, a comely appearance, and adhered to the Protestant faith. There was merely one significant obstacle. His nation was engaged in conflict with Denmark, the homeland of Elizabeth's mother Anne, and the Stuarts rejected him based on principle. Following the evaluation and dismissal of nearly all of Europe's most desirable bachelors, Elizabeth and his family finally settled on one candidate, who emerged somewhat unexpectedly. The fortunate individual was Frederick IV, Count Palatine of the Rhine. Although possessing a distinguished lineage, he governed only a minor territory within the Holy Roman Empire. Nevertheless, he created a remarkable impact. When Frederick visited Elizabeth, he clearly comprehended the stakes involved and exerted maximum effort. During his time with the princess, everyone observed how he seemed to find pleasure solely in his company and conversation. This, quite frankly, represents astute strategy in matters of romance. His true masterstroke, however, came subsequently. There exists no guaranteed path to any woman's affections, but the route to Elizabeth's heart lay through his brother Henry. Recognizing this insight immediately, the clever Frederick cultivated a close bond with the Prince of Wales upon his arrival, a tactic Elizabeth strongly endorsed. Despite all this exertion, however, Frederick was soon to encounter a significant impediment. King James appreciated Frederick's connections, and Elizabeth approved of his choice of friends, but the Queen Mother Anne held a completely contrary view. Anne hailed from a long lineage of kings and had also wedded a king. Consequently, she was horrified by the notion that Frederick was merely a count. As we shall observe, this disapproval would lead to calamitous results. An objecting mother-in-law can severely impact one's self-regard, and Frederick must have felt somewhat inadequate concerning the esteemed House of Stuart. Even so, the couple signed a preliminary marriage agreement in May 1612, much to the utter dismay of Queen Anne. Before much time passed, an entirely new catastrophe loomed ahead. In the period preceding Elizabeth's prominent wedding, his cherished brother Henry became unwell. Then almost instantaneously, the circumstances deteriorated rapidly. The 18-year-old Prince of Wales died on November 6, 1612 from typhoid fever. This occurred mere months before Elizabeth was scheduled to marry, plunging him into the midst of turmoil. Prince Henry enjoyed immense popularity among the populations of England and Scotland, and his tragic demise prompted floods of mourners to offer condolences at his memorial. Yet no one mourned with the intensity of Elizabeth. Henry had represented his entire universe, and his death destabilized him profoundly. Is it surprising, then, that he proceeded to make an impulsive choice? With Henry deceased, Elizabeth Stuart now stood second in the line of succession, following his infant brother Charles. This development rendered him even more desirable as a spouse. Numerous individuals, including his mother Queen Anne, encouraged him to abandon the perceived good-for-nothing loser, Frederick, and pursue more advantageous prospects. Elizabeth's response defied their expectations. Elizabeth Stuart might have exhibited some petulance, but he was unwilling to retract his commitment to Frederick, possessing a poignant motive for upholding his pledge. He knew Henry had favored his fiancée, and in certain respects, marrying Frederick signified preserving his brother's memory. It's unfortunate that despite all this, his marriage turned into a colossal disarray. Elizabeth and Frederick commenced their married life spectacularly. Their royal wedding was the paramount event of the century, a significant claim indeed. When they exchanged vows on Valentine's Day 1613, an unprecedented number of royals journeyed to partake in the festivities, and the incessant banqueting and revelry nearly depleted Elizabeth's father's finances. However, ominous indications emerged early on. In anticipation of his wedding, Frederick endeavored to prove himself deserving of his princess bride. He entirely refurbished his residence at Heidelberg Castle, converting it from a modest ancestral home into an expansive palace featuring a monkey house and a Renaissance-inspired garden. While potentially a magnificent gesture, it also served as a warning sign. Frederick harbored insecurities, and Elizabeth possessed all the influence. Just prior to Elizabeth Stuart departing his home in the United Kingdom to reside with Frederick in Heidelberg, his father issued a peculiar and detrimental stipulation. He insisted Frederick pledge to treat his daughter Elizabeth as a queen and grant him precedence even over his own mother, Louise Juliana. Did this arrangement proceed smoothly? Well, what is your assessment? As events unfolded, Elizabeth's new mother-in-law, Louise, was far from pleased that this indulged young newcomer was arriving in his homeland and promptly displacing him from his position of honor. The rapport between the two women remained icy thereafter, and Elizabeth Stuart would soon find himself desperately needing allies. In 1619, just as Elizabeth had at last begun to establish herself in Heidelberg, his life underwent its most significant change thus far. That year, the volatile kingdom of Bohemia required a new king, yet no one desired the stressful, unrewarding position. Eventually, they somehow persuaded Frederick to accept it, despite his own reluctance. Except one factor motivated him. Frederick might not have desired the Bohemian crown, but Elizabeth certainly did. Like his mother, Elizabeth was accustomed to the company of kings and queens, and he absolutely refused to forego his opportunity to become a sovereign. He cajoled Frederick and appealed to his sense of honor to accept the role. Well, one should exercise caution in their desires. After Frederick assumed the royal position, the new king and queen of Bohemia relocated to Prague, the kingdom's center, establishing themselves in a palace. Initially, matters proceeded favorably. Elizabeth received his own coronation on November 7, 1619, and purportedly the new king. As anyone could have predicted, Elizabeth and his husband were entering a veritable nest of vipers. You see, there was a valid reason the Bohemian throne was unwanted. The Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand II, already considered himself the legitimate heir and planned to seize the kingdom violently. He targeted Elizabeth in his crown, and he struck effectively. Ultimately, Elizabeth's aspiration of becoming queen transformed into a complete nightmare. Ferdinand launched an attack with full force, and the novice royals collapsed with astonishing speed. By November 8, 1620, almost precisely 1 year after Elizabeth and Frederick ascended the Bohemian throne, they had forfeited their crowns along with all their other titles. And then the genuine terrors commenced. As Elizabeth's fairy tale existence crumbled around him, he fled for his life, heavily pregnant once more. He escaped Prague, heading towards Germany, accompanied by his lady-in-waiting, Amalia of Solms-Braunfels. The journey did not proceed as anticipated. He and Frederick were now considered public adversaries, and people refused them refuge en route. Before long, the situation reached a critical juncture. Elizabeth wasn't merely pregnant, he was significantly advanced in his term, and the shock of their circumstances offered no relief. While he and Amalia desperately sought aid for survival, the fugitive queen entered labor. He scarcely managed to secure refuge at Kustrin Castle near Berlin to deliver his fifth child, Maurice. Yet his ordeal was far from concluded. Following months as fugitives, Elizabeth and his disheveled household finally secured a safe retreat in The Hague, courtesy of the compassion of the Netherlands' Prince of Orange. Even this respite quickly became unsatisfactory. The court was modest, austere, and bore no resemblance to the opulence Queen Elizabeth was accustomed to, causing him to become agitated. Perhaps this explains why he began to stir up trouble. The modest Dutch court proved unwelcoming as well, and Elizabeth encountered few amicable individuals around him. This made it even more difficult when his closest supporter transformed into a fierce adversary. His lady-in-waiting, Amalia, initiated a relationship with the Prince of Orange himself, marrying him in 1625. Suddenly, Amalia held the superior position, not Elizabeth. Spoiler alert, Elizabeth did not react favorably to this development. Elizabeth could hardly tolerate observing his friend receive all the acclaim. In truth, he refused to tolerate it, and the women became intense competitors. They ultimately established two distinct and rival courts, contending with each other over possessing the finest attire, hosting the best gatherings, and attracting the most admirers. And the ultimate display of rivalry was still forthcoming. While the exiled royal pair resided in The Hague, Elizabeth and Frederick remained preoccupied with thoughts of their honor and methods to demonstrate their value. It seemed logical, therefore, when Frederick resolved to accompany the King of Sweden, Elizabeth's former suitor, Gustavus Adolphus, onto the battlefield. It proved to be an encounter with a harsh fate. Frederick did not come back from his ill-omened journey, but not for the reasons one might assume. He not only endured the battlefield, but Gustavus Adolphus also attempted to assist his fellow royal by offering to help restore Frederick as king. Fearing he might not endure a second reign, Frederick declined. Ironically, he did not survive regardless. Back in The Hague, Elizabeth eagerly anticipated his husband's return. He ultimately experienced heartbreak beyond description. On the journey back from the battlefield, an infection that had been afflicting Frederick's body finally took his life, and he died on November 29, 1632, at the age of 36. Then someone faced the task of informing his queen. When Elizabeth received news that Frederick would never return, his reaction was virtually uncontrolled. His sorrow nearly pushed him to insanity, and he refused all food, drink, or sleep for 3 consecutive days, incapable of accepting that his husband was truly gone forever. Upon recovering his composure, a single notion dominated his thoughts: revenge. Elizabeth's condition was so concerning that his brother Charles of Worcester, now King of England, invited him back to Great Britain to recuperate. Elizabeth declined. After all, he entertained grander ambitions. He became intensely focused on restoring his son, Charles Louis's entitlement to the electorate of the Palatinate, his late father's former position. And this was not his sole ambitious endeavor. Amidst Elizabeth's flamboyant mourning for Frederick, his old rival Amalia re-emerged and surpassed him in the most unfortunate manner possible. When Amalia's own husband died, she commissioned an even larger, superior memorial portrait of her own family. Ah, if only Elizabeth's life had concluded with such minor squabbles instead of profound tragedy. Throughout his life, Elizabeth's 13 children diminished in number one after another, but the ensuing decades proved the most difficult. 3 of his surviving offspring died within a 3-year span, and as Elizabeth neared old age, fewer than half of his original children remained alive. Fate had treated him harshly, but it was poised to become even more severe. In 1649, Elizabeth received the most shattering news of his existence. England had undergone civil unrest, and the government had savagely executed his younger brother, King Charles I, banishing his entire family simultaneously. That is correct. Elizabeth lost his crown, his husband, and now his ancestral royal connection. Although Elizabeth grieved for his deceased offspring, he did not exactly treat the living ones with tenderness. Many accused him of being a cold, remote mother during their youth, too focused on acquiring and maintaining his throne to nurture them. He remained estranged from them as adults. Naturally, this only amplified the difficulty of enduring the subsequent notorious information. On June 20, 1646, Elizabeth's son, Prince Philip, killed the notorious French gallant Colonel Jacques de Lepinay in a duel, and his motives were scandalous. According to hearsay, Lepinay had incited Philip by alleging he had engaged in affairs not only with his sister, Princess Louise, but also with his mother, Elizabeth, herself. Man, I sincerely hope that rumor lacks truth. In 1660, destiny finally favored Elizabeth, and his family, the Stuarts, reclaimed their throne, with his nephew Charles II becoming king. Elizabeth lost no time capitalizing on this turn of fortune and sailed back to England permanently, arriving in May 1661. It marked a victorious return for England's cherished princess, but his enjoyment was destined to be brief. Because his reign with Frederick in Bohemia endured for merely 1 year, Elizabeth Stuart is renowned today as the Winter Queen, complementing Frederick's Winter King designation. This enduring yet dishonorable notoriety could scarcely have satisfied the ambitious Elizabeth. Ironically, however, it was winter that ultimately proved fatal for the exiled queen. In the harsh initial months of 1662, Elizabeth had been back in England for mere weeks when his health deteriorated severely. The aging queen contracted a severe case of pneumonia, and on February 10th, he succumbed to a lung hemorrhage and died. All the splendors of his life had long vanished, yet one final humiliation remained at his conclusion. Once Elizabeth's time finally concluded, the populace who had once adored him, even his own family, seemed to forget the treasured jewel of England. Only one of his sons, Rupert, attended to bear his coffin to his final resting site in Westminster Abbey. Nevertheless, at least one individual awaited him there. They interred him beside his long-departed brother, Henry, Prince of Wales. Elizabeth Stuart's life, once filled with royal promise, spiraled into tragedy. From her pampered beginnings as a princess to her aspirations as Queen of Bohemia, her dreams were shattered by war, betrayal, and loss. Despite her strong will, her reign ended in exile, marked by the death of her husband, the loss of her children, and the downfall of her family's legacy. Her life reflects the profound cost of ambition, love, and the harsh realities of royal existence, leaving behind a legacy of both triumph and heartbreak. Thank you for viewing History Exposed. If you delight in discovering the finest narratives in history, please hit like and subscribe to continue exploring with us. Remember to visit our main page, Factinet, for more astounding facts about everything.